My guardian sold me to a duke blamed for his brother's death. I found the true letter in the stable loft. The morning room in my guardian's house on Half Moon Street smelled of cold ashes and lemon polish, the sort of smell I would carry in my hair for the rest of that day, and into the carriage and as far north as Westmoreland. It was the second Tuesday of October in the year of our Lord 1813. I was 23 and had been my guardian's ward for 9 years, ever since my parents had been carried off within the same week by a fever that had spared no one in our village save myself. My father's distant cousin, Mr. Silas Crail, had taken me in because the law had given him no choice in the matter, and he had reminded me of that fact, in one form or another, every quarter day since. He stood at the cold marble fireplace that morning with the leather portfolio under his arm, the seal of his wine-colored wax already broken upon it, and he did not look at me when I came into the room. He looked at the man seated at the writing desk by the long sash window, a tall man in a high-collared dark indigo tailcoat with a fountain pen lifted above a folded sheet of vellum, a man whose face I had not yet seen close enough to read. "Mr. Crail," the man said. His voice was lower than I had expected and entirely level. "You will permit me a moment with the lady before I sign." "As you wish, Your Grace," my guardian answered. He shifted the portfolio from one arm to the other. "Though I must say a public matter is best concluded without private theater. The settlement is fair. The notes are paid in full upon your signature." "I will sign," the Duke said. "I am asking for the moment first." I had stopped just inside the threshold. I did not move toward the desk. I let the door close itself behind me. I had on my deep wine-red silk gown that had been my mother's last commission for me, with the cream Brussels lace at the neckline, and over it the faded gray wool traveling cape buttoned at the throat that I was prepared to never take off again. My gloves were laced to the elbow. The small ivory cameo of my mother lay against the hollow of my throat on its pearl ribbon. "Miss Aldermere," the Duke said. He did not rise. He set the pen down on the blotter very gently, the way a man sets a cup back on its saucer when he has decided not to drink. "Will you come and stand by the window, where you may see me, and speak to me before any paper is signed?" I crossed the morning room to the window. I did not look at my guardian. I stood 3 feet from the writing desk and I let him see the wine-red silk and the faded gray wool and the cameo at my throat. And I waited. "You understand the terms?" the Duke asked. "I do," I said. "You understand who I am, by reputation." "I understand what is said of you, Your Grace. That is not the same thing." His mouth almost moved. It did not, quite. He looked at me a long moment with deep hooded gray eyes that did not flinch from mine. "I will require nothing of you that you do not freely give," he said. "You will have the entire West Wing at Thornley Hollow. My late mother's sister will reside with you as your chaperone. I will not enter the rooms set aside for your use. You are not entering my household as a wife in any sense beyond the legal one until, and unless you choose otherwise. Do you understand me, Miss Aldermere?" "I do," I said again. "Then I will sign," he said. My guardian made a small sound at the fireplace. "Your Grace, before you sign, would you wish to see the lady's face? She is veiled, and I would not have you afterward say—" "No," the Duke said. He did not raise his voice. He laid the pen flat across the vellum and turned the chair so that he was facing my guardian directly. "I will not look at her until she chooses to be looked at. Sign your half, Mr. Crail. I will sign mine." I turned away from them both. I walked the entire length of the morning room, past the cold fireplace, past my guardian, past the painted screen, past the secretary desk where my own letters had been opened and read for 9 years, and I went to the mantel above the second hearth at the far end of the room. There upon the marble stood the small ivory miniature of my mother, the one I had set there when I was 14 years old and not been permitted to move. And there it had sat for 9 years, gathering the soot of 9 London winters. I picked it up. I wrapped it in my handkerchief. I tucked it into my reticule. I turned back to the desk. My guardian had gone an unfamiliar shade about the mouth, but he said nothing. The Duke did not look up from the settlement until I had reached the desk again. Then he looked, and only then, and only at my hands, and he wrote his name beneath my guardian's in the slow, firm script of a man signing a death certificate, or a discharge, or a deed of release. It was done before noon. The leather portfolio of promissory notes, £8,400, as I would later learn, owed to 7 different houses in the city, passed from the Duke's man of business across the desk into my guardian's hands. The marriage settlement, signed by both, was sealed and folded into a smaller portfolio that the Duke himself placed in his coat. There was a small, odd silence after the seals had been pressed. My guardian stood at the fireplace, turning the portfolio of notes over and over in his fingers, as if he had not quite decided whether to feel the weight of it. The Duke stood from the desk and laid a hand lightly upon the back of the chair he had quitted, and he addressed himself, of all things, to my guardian's housekeeper, who had come in with a tray. "Mrs. Driffield," he said, "will you be good enough to send a girl to call a carriage? The lady will not be traveling in this house's chaise, she will be traveling in mine." "Your Grace," my guardian said sharply. "There was no need." "There is every need, Mr. Crail. The lady will leave this house in my care from the hour the settlement is signed. That is in the settlement. You signed it." He had not raised his voice once that morning. He did not raise it now. "She will require an hour in her room to gather what she chooses. My chaise will wait at the curb. We are married tomorrow at 2:30 at St. George's. I will lodge tonight at Mivart's. The lady will lodge at Mivart's also, in a separate apartment, with the housekeeper as her chaperone, until the ceremony. Is that satisfactory, Mr. Crail? Or do you wish to dispute the clause to which you set your hand?" My guardian did not dispute the clause to which he had set his hand. He stood at the fireplace with the leather portfolio under his arm and watched me leave the room, and he did not embrace me, and he did not bid me farewell, and at the door I turned and looked at him once and said only, "Goodbye, Mr. Crail." He nodded at the floor. I did not see his face again for 6 weeks. I packed my own trunk in the small back bedroom that had been mine since I was 14. I took the books my father had given me. I took the writing case that had been my mother's. I took 2 gowns, the wine red I was wearing and a plain dark gray for traveling, and I took my prayer book, and I took the small worked sampler I had made at 13, and I took the pearl ribbon and the cameo, and I left every other thing in that house. I did not weep over the leaving of any of it. I had wept enough at 14 to last a lifetime. We were married by special license at St. George's, Hanover Square, the following afternoon, with 3 witnesses from his man's chambers, and the rain blackening the stone steps as we came out into the street. I did not weep. I did not weep on the steps, and I did not weep in the carriage, and I did not weep on the long damp road north over 4 days of changing horses and country inns, and the slow gray unrolling of England into water and stone. I sat opposite him in the chaise. He read his correspondence. He did not press me for talk. Once, on the second afternoon, he passed me a small paper packet of barley sugar without comment and turned back to his papers. On the third evening, at an inn near Lancaster, where the rain had slowed us to a halt before sunset, he came down to the parlor where I had been left with a cup of tea and a book of the inns, and he said, very quietly, from the doorway, "Miss Aldermere, I have been thinking that I ought to tell you something now, before we reach the manor, that you might wish to know. May I sit?" "You may sit, Your Grace." He sat. He did not lean back. He turned his glass of brandy in his hands. "The West Wing has been my late mother's until 3 years ago," he said. "I have not entered it in 3 years. The bed is fresh. The hangings are fresh. The carpets have been beaten this summer. There is nothing in it that will distress you. I tell you only because I have lately heard, through letters, that ladies arriving at houses in mourning sometimes find them oppressive. The West Wing is not a wing in mourning. I have made a deliberate point of it. I tell you this because I would not have you arrive at Thornley Hollow expecting darkness. I watched him over the rim of my cup. He was a man who did not know how to soften a thing he had decided to say, and so he said it plain, and I had not quite expected the plainness. "That was kind of you, Your Grace," I said. "May I ask you a question in return?" "You may ask me any question." "Why did you take me?" He looked at me a long moment. He turned the brandy glass once more. He set it down upon the table between us. "Because Mr. Crale's name had been mentioned to me in 3 different houses in the city as a man whose creditors were closing on him," he said. "Because his ward, meaning yourself, had been spoken of, twice, by ladies of my acquaintance who had met you at one of the small dinners he gives in October, once by Lady Hetherington, once by Mrs. Wynne. As a young woman who would have a hard time of it if his creditors had their way, because the marriage solved a problem at his end and a different problem at mine, and because, Miss Aldermere, I will be plain with you, I have not slept in 3 years, and I needed a household that was not silent. I am not paying your guardian £8,400 for a wife. I am paying him for a household. You are not required to be the wife. You are required only to be in the house. If you choose more than that, in time, you will choose more than that. If you do not, you do not. And if I choose nothing, then you are a Duchess of Thornley Hollow with an income of 3,000 a year, a west wing, a library, a chaperone, and the run of my house and grounds for the rest of your life. And I am a man who has a household." I set my cup down. I was not yet certain I believed him entirely, but I believed him enough that I did not contradict any part of it. "Thank you, Your Grace," I said. "You are welcome, Miss Aldermere," he said. He stood. He took up his glass. At the door he stopped and said, without turning, "I would also have you know that I did not kill my brother. I do not expect you to believe me on the strength of my saying so. I tell you only because I would have you know that I have said it once, in your hearing, before you cross my threshold." He went out. I sat in the parlor another half-hour. I did not finish the tea. Thornley Hollow rose out of the late October mist on the 4th afternoon, a long, low sprawl of gray ivy-covered stone above a small dark tarn, with the iron gates already standing open and a single line of footmen at the door. The dowager aunt, Mrs. Honora Pemberton, his late mother's sister, came down the steps in a high-collared dark mauve silk gown with white lace at the cuffs and collar, and took both my hands in hers as if she had been waiting for me her entire life. "Child," she said, "you will be cold. Come in by the fire. We have aired the west wing and the bed is warm." Behind her, in the stone-flagged hall, the Duke stood a little apart, one hand on the back of a chair, watching us as a man watches the meeting of 2 people he hopes will like one another and is not sure he is allowed to hope. The west wing was 3 rooms and a small stairway, and a private morning parlor with a long window that looked out over the tarn. The bed was warm. The fire had been lit since dawn. There were fresh tapers on the mantel and a small jug of late October roses on the writing desk, and a leather-bound copy of Cowper's poem set out as if it had been remembered I had once mentioned liking him. I did not remember mentioning it. Mrs. Pemberton, when I asked, smiled at the floor and said, "He took some pains. He has spent 5 weeks taking pains." I did not like to say. The 5 weeks passed. I had not expected them to pass quietly, but they did. He kept his word in every particular. He did not enter the west wing. He took breakfast in the small east morning room and supper in the long oak dining hall, and he sent word, the second day, that I was free to take both meals in my own parlor or to join him and the dowager aunt as I pleased, and that there was no expectation either way. I joined them at supper on the third evening because I would not have my decisions made for me by reputation. He rose when I came in. He sat when I was seated. He did not look at me for long. The dowager aunt did much of the talking in those first nights. She had a way of asking small questions that did not require an answer. Was the road much washed at Banbury, child? Have you read Mrs. Edgeworth's last? I will lend it to you. That allowed the Duke and me to be silent in company without the silence becoming the whole table. By the end of the first week, I knew that the cook's name was Mrs. Lowndes, that the under-gardener was an Irishman called Quigley, who had served at Salamanca with the late brother, that the post came at 9:30 on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that the Duke rose every morning at 5 and rode the long path round the tarn before breakfast in any weather. We spoke, in those 5 weeks, of Cowper. We spoke of Mr. Wordsworth, who lived 11 miles to the south at Rydal, and whom the Duke had once met at a county subscription dinner and pronounced kinder in person than in print. We spoke of the lake and of the stone walls, and of the late October rose hips on the chapel wall. We did not speak of his brother. We did not speak of London. He did not ask me what my guardian had said of him, and I did not ask him what he supposed my guardian had said. Once, on the 11th day, in the small library off the gallery, not his great library, but the morning library that Mrs. Pemberton kept for her own correspondence, he came in with a book under his arm and stopped when he saw me at the window seat with my mother's writing case open on my knees. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I did not know you were here. I will go." "You will not go on my account, your grace." He hesitated. He looked at the book under his arm. He looked at the carpet. "Tell me what you are reading, Miss Aldermere." "Cowper. The letters. I am at the one to Lady Hesketh about the hares." His mouth did move, this time, almost into a smile. It went no further. "He kept 3 of them," he said, "Tiny and Puss and Bess. Bess was the one with the temper." "You have read them, your grace." "I have," he said. "I read them in the spring of 11, when I had run out of any other thing to read. They are kind letters. I have not been able to read kind letters at any other time. May I borrow the book from you, when you have done with it? The set in the great library is incomplete. I have been waiting for a copy of the 2nd volume. You may have this one now, your grace, if you wish." "I will wait," he said. "Finish your reading. I will wait." He left. He took his own book and went out by the gallery door. I marked my page and laid the book aside, and I think I sat at the window for a quarter of an hour without quite returning to it, because there had been a thing in his voice on the words "kind letters" that had not been in it at any other moment of those 11 days. Mrs. Pemberton, who had watched her nephew for 3 years carrying a weight she would not name to me directly, watched us at supper and at breakfast and on the long walks down to the tarn, and once, at the end of the 2nd week, she set a hand upon my wrist as we were going up the stairs. "He did not kill his brother," she said quietly. "I want you to know that I know it. I want you to know that the household knows it. London does not know it, and London will not be told, because he will not be told to defend himself by anyone who loves him." "Why will he not?" I asked her. She let go of my wrist. She did not answer me. She climbed 2 more stairs and turned and said, "Because he believes the silence costs him only his name, and he is willing to pay it." The 5th Sunday came in the first week of November. The household, Mrs. Pemberton, the steward, the under-steward, the cook, the housemaids, the stable lads, the under-gardener, the boy who carried the post, all walked the half-mile to the village chapel for morning service, and the Duke went with them as he always did. I had pleaded a slight headache and stayed behind, and he had bowed at the door of the west wing and said only, "Take what air you wish, The grounds are yours. I had no headache. I had an idea I had been turning over for 3 days, and it required the house to be empty. Mrs. Pemberton, before she went, had said over her shoulder, almost in passing, "His brother used to hide in the stable loft as a boy. I have not been up there since before the war." I waited until I heard the last cart roll out through the iron gates. I put on the faded gray wool traveling cape buttoned at the throat reaching past my ankles, and I walked across the gravel courtyard and through the small arched stable gate and into the cobbled stable yard where the late October sun was breaking through in single pale shafts. The hayloft door stood half ajar, swinging a little on its iron hinges. I climbed the wooden ladder slowly. The loft smelt of dry hay and old leather and dust, and a faint sweet trace of some long-spilt ale. There was a single small window in the gable that let in a clean shaft of light, and the rafters above were thick with old swallows' nests and twists of straw. I walked the length of the loft. I crouched at the far end, where an old hay bale had been pushed up against the back wall under a deep cavity in the rafter, where the timber had been half-shaped as a child's hiding hole. I set my hand into the cavity. I felt straw. I felt cold timber. I felt at the very back a softness wrapped in dry leather, tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. I drew it out into the shaft of light. It was a packet of letters, 6 of them. The leather wrapping had been oiled once, long ago, and was stiff at the folds. The blue silk ribbon was the color of a winter sky in the last hour before dusk. I sat down upon the hay bale and I untied the ribbon and I unfolded the leather, and the topmost letter came open in my lap. 3 folded sheets, the wax seal already broken, the date in the upper right-hand corner written in a thin, neat copperplate hand, 14th September, 1810. Glenmore. The salutation read, "My dear Hollins." I read it where I sat. I read it twice. I read it a third time with my hand pressed against my mouth, and the shaft of light slowly turning to a different angle on the loft floor. If this story is finding you tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps these candlelit stories find the readers who need them. The letter was in the late Duke's brother's own hand. It was addressed to a school friend at Cambridge, a man called Henry Hollins of Trinity, who had been the brother's confidant since Eton. It was 16 close-written pages, and it was the most lucid, most quiet, most ordered description of a settled intention to die that I had ever read. He wrote of the dueling injury at Salamanca in the spring of 1808, the saber cut along his left side that had never properly closed, the laudanum he had used for 2 years afterward, the long grayness that had come upon him in the autumn of 1809 and had not lifted since. He wrote of his elder brother, Tobias, "whom I love better than any man living, and whom I will not consult upon this matter, for he would only ride to Glenmore and sit at my bedside until I changed my mind. And I have not the strength to change my mind, Hollins, and I will not have him sit at my bedside watching me grow smaller." He wrote, and I found my own hand shaking on the page, that he intended to end his own life before the next winter sets fully in, on the moor above the lodge, with my own pistol, by my own hand, in the hour before dawn, when there is no one upon the road. He wrote, on the last page, in a hand still steady, "I ask you one thing, Hollins, and I ask it as the last thing I shall ever ask of any friend. When the news reaches London, and it will reach London, for the world has never been kind to a dukedom in mourning, there will be those who will whisper that my brother had a hand in it. There are men in town who would profit by it. I ask you to write what you know of my mind. I ask you to swear to whoever will listen that he is innocent of my death, that he has never raised a hand to me in his life, that he has been the better brother of the 2 of us in every season I have known him. He must not carry the blame the world will surely lay at his door. Swear it for me, Hollins. He has loved me too well to bear it." He had signed it, Edmund. The signature was in the same neat copper plate as the body of the letter, only smaller, as if he had not wanted to take up the room. I sat very still upon the hay bale. I did not weep. I had not wept at 14, and I had not wept at 23 in my guardian's morning room, and I did not weep upon the loft floor of Thornley Hollow that morning either. But I felt at last the slow tightening of the chest that means a thing has gone past anger and into something quieter and more useful. The man whose name I now bore had been carrying this for 3 winters. The brother whose hand I held had asked a friend at Cambridge to swear it for him. The friend at Cambridge, a Henry Hollins of Trinity, had not sworn it. Either he had not known how to, or he had not lived to, or he had thought the asking too painful. Whichever it was, the swearing had fallen into a rafter cavity in a Westmoreland stable loft, and had waited there 3 years for somebody to climb a wooden ladder on a Sunday morning when the household was at chapel. I lifted the second letter. I lifted the third. I read them one by one. The 5 letters beneath the topmost one were the boyhood letters and the school letters and the warm, cheerful ones. A letter from Eton in 1801 about a stolen pudding. The brother had been 13, and his elder brother, Tobias, 16. And the pudding had been smuggled out of the provost's kitchen by a boy whose name had been crossed through with a thick black line for prudence's sake. A letter from a sea-bathing trip to Lyme in 1804 about the indignity of striped bathing gowns. I am told they are necessary, Tobias, but I tell you I have never felt more like a wasp upon the strand. A letter from the regiment in the spring of 1808, written 4 days before Salamanca, full of cheerful nonsense about a French farrier called Mathieu, and a borrowed horse named Camomile, that bit. And 2 longer letters from the autumn of 1809 to a cousin in Norfolk that I read twice, for they showed already, in passing phrases, the slow gray lifting of cheerfulness from his hand. I have not been so well since Salamanca, he had written in October 1809, and the weather does not help, and the surgeon's report does not help, and I am poor company even to myself, but I shall mend, Cousin Charlotte, do not be anxious. He had not mended. He had written the 16 pages 11 months later. I gathered them all back into the leather. I tied the ribbon. I sat in the loft for a long time after I had tied it. The shaft of light moved an entire foot across the floor before I stood up. I came down the ladder with the packet in both hands, and I walked back across the cobbled yard and through the small arched stable gate, and across the gravel and in by the side door. And I went up to the west wing and laid the packet upon my own writing desk beside the jug of late October roses, and I sat down opposite it as a person sits opposite a creature that may yet bite. The household came back from the chapel at 1:30. I heard them in the stone-flagged hall. I heard Mrs. Pemberton's voice, and the steward's and the cook's, and beneath them the deeper, quieter voice of the man whose name I now bore. I waited until the household had supped, and the west wing had been left to me, and the hour was on the wrong side of 11 o'clock, and the rain had begun to hammer the long arched window of my parlor. Then I took up the packet, and a single candle, and a heavy wine-red Regency silk dressing gown over my locked attire, fully covering throat to ankle, and I walked the long passage down to the library. His door stood half open. He was at the long oak desk by the fire, in his shirt sleeves and his black silk waistcoat with the silver buttons, with a glass of brandy half set down on the blotter. He did not turn at once. He had the look of a man who knew the sound of my step on the boards by now, and had decided not to startle me. "You may come in," he said quietly, without looking up. "If it is what I think, you may come in." I stood in the doorway. The rain was hammering. The candle in my hand guttered once. "Did you kill your brother?" I said. I had not meant to say it that way. It was the way it came out. He set the brandy glass down. He set it down very carefully, as if it might break against the blotter. He stood. He walked the length of the desk to where the candelabrum stood in the center of the long oak top. He laid both his hands flat upon the desk, and he looked at me for a long moment with the deep, hooded gray eyes that had not flinched from mine in my guardian's morning room 3 weeks before. "No," he said, "I did not. He killed himself with one of his own pistols on the moor above Glenmore on the morning of the 17th of December, 1810. I rode out at dawn because the underkeeper had heard the shot. I found him at the foot of the hawthorn at the head of the gully. I read the note he had written and pinned to his coat. I burned the note in the keeper's lodge fire because my mother was dying of consumption in the south wing of this house, and the doctor had said 3 weeks at the most, and I would not have her last weeks made of that knowledge. I told the constable he had fallen from his horse. I told the household he had fallen from his horse. I told everyone but my own conscience that he had fallen from his horse, and that is the whole of it, Miss Aldermere, and there is no one alive to corroborate a word of it." It was the first time in 3 years he had spoken those two sentences aloud. I knew it as I heard them. I knew it from the angle of his shoulders, and the way his hands had come down flat upon the desk, and the faintest minute tremor along his jaw beneath the neat short stubble. I crossed to the desk. I laid the leather-wrapped packet upon the oak. I laid it in front of his hands. "He wrote a letter," I said, "3 months before, to a man called Hollins, at Cambridge. He left it in the stable loft above the loose boxes. Read the topmost one, Your Grace." He looked at the packet. He did not move at first. "In the loft?" he said. "Behind the rafter cavity, under the hay bale, where, your aunt told me, he used to hide as a boy." He pressed his palm flat against the leather. He undid the blue silk ribbon. He drew out the topmost letter, and the candlelight caught the thin, neat copper plate. He read it where he stood. He did not sit. I watched his face for the whole 16 pages, and I saw in it the slow undoing of a knot that had been pulled tight for 3 winters. When he reached the last page, the page where his brother had written his name and asked Hollins to swear it for him, he set the letter very carefully back upon the leather, and he covered his face with both hands for the count of perhaps 8 or 9 seconds, and then he took his hands away, and he was a man again. "It is his hand," he said. "Yes." He did not. He could not finish. He tried again. "He did not write to me." "No, Your Grace. He thought you would ride to Glenmore." "I would have ridden to Glenmore." "Yes." He looked at the letter on the desk, and he looked at me, and he said, in a voice I had not heard from him before, 3 years. 3 years, I said. "I have carried it," he said, "for 3 years." "I know. My mother died not knowing." "She would have understood, Your Grace." "She would have understood," he said, "and it would have killed her sooner." He was right about that. He sat down at last. He sat in the heavy oak chair behind the desk. He put one hand upon the leather-wrapped packet, and he kept it there. "Miss Aldermere," he said after some time, "I do not know how to thank you for this." "You do not thank me, Your Grace. I propose to ride to London the week after next with the packet, and lay this letter on my guardian's desk and require him to write to every drawing-room in London. I know which drawing-rooms. I have been kept in his house 9 years. I know the names." He looked up at me sharply. "You will not. I will not have you ride to London on my account. The whispers do not signify." "They signify to me," I said. "And they signified to your brother enough that he wrote 16 pages about it 3 months before he died. He asked Hollins to swear it for him. Hollins did not swear it. Hollins is dead. I asked your aunt this evening. Hollins died of fever in the fens in the spring of 11. The swearing fell to no one. It falls now to me, Your Grace, as the present Duchess of this house, and I propose to discharge it." He was silent a long while. He looked at the rain on the window. He looked at the brandy glass. He looked at his hands. "You are not yet the Duchess of this house in any sense beyond the legal one," he said quietly. I am the Duchess of this house in every sense the world will know, I said. And the world is what we are riding to London to address. The other matter, Your Grace, may be addressed in its own time, by my own choosing, as we agreed. Will you let me do this thing for your brother's name? And for yours? He did not answer at once. He took up the leather-wrapped packet and he held it across the desk in both hands, as if it were a small live thing. I will not let you do it, he said. I will not stop you, but I will not let you. There is a difference. There is, I said. I will take the difference. I rode south 2 mornings later with Mrs. Pemberton in the heavy traveling carriage, and the leather-wrapped packet in a locked dispatch box beneath the seat. The aunt had asked a single question before we set out. Are you certain, child? And when I had said yes, she had pressed both my hands and said only, Good. He will not know how to ask you not to fear. Do not fear. Half of London has wanted reasons not to believe the worst of him. Give them the reasons. We had a long, quiet conversation on the second afternoon, between Lancaster and Preston, with the rain steady on the roof of the carriage and the road a slow grey tape unrolling beneath the wheels. You loved him very much, your nephew, I said. I have loved him since he was 4, she said, and his brother since he was 2. They were not alike, child. Edmund was the gentler. Tobias was the steadier. People mistook the steadiness for hardness, because Tobias did not trouble to charm anybody he did not already like, and that was very few. But he was the better brother. Edmund knew it. Edmund said it to me, in this room, in the autumn of '9. You knew Edmund was unwell. I knew he was unwell. I did not know how unwell. He hid it from me. He hid it from his mother. He hid it best from Tobias, because he knew Tobias would have ridden to Glenmore and stayed. He hid it from everyone but a man at Trinity. He hid it from everyone but a man at Trinity, who died in the spring of '11 of fever in the fens, and so he hid it from everyone in the end. Yes. She was silent a long moment. She was working at a small piece of mauve embroidery in the lamplit corner of the carriage, and her fingers did not pause. When he was found on the moor, she said, Tobias did not tell me what was in the note. He did not tell his mother. He did not tell the constable. He told the steward to record a fall from a horse. The steward, that is Mr. Hodgson, you have not met him. He has been at Thornley 30 years. Knew it was not a fall. The keeper knew it was not a fall. The under-gardener Quigley knew it was not a fall. They all kept it. They kept it for him because they loved him. They keep it still. London does not know what the household knows, child. The household has been waiting 3 winters for someone to say a thing in his hearing that might let him put the thing down. And no one has. No one has. He has not let anyone, child. He has been a great wall in his own house. You are the first person who has gone and got the key from a place none of us thought to look. Quigley said to me at breakfast yesterday, the young Duchess found it in the loft. Ma'am? In Master Edmund's old hiding place? God love her. I did not think of it. I had not thought of that loft in 20 years. Mr. Quigley served with him at Salamanca. He carried him off the field. He bound the wound at the river crossing. He has had a small grace and favor cottage on the estate ever since. He came to me in the kitchen yesterday and said, Tell the young Duchess I am her man, ma'am, if she has need of one. Anything she rides for, I ride for. He is a quiet man, Quigley. He does not make speeches. I record it as he gave it. I looked out at the rain. I am glad of it, Mrs. Pemberton. He is glad of you, child. We did not speak much more that afternoon. She finished a corner of the mauve embroidery. I read a little. The road went on south toward Stafford in the wet. The road south was 4 days. We slept at Kendal and Lancaster and Stafford and Banbury, and on the 5th afternoon we drew up in Half Moon Street, and I climbed down in my dark charcoal traveling cape with the leather-wrapped packet under my arm, and I rang at the door of my guardian's house. He had not been told to expect me. He came down to the morning room in his dark brown tailcoat over the wine silk waistcoat embroidered with small gold thread, his hard, pale gray eyes lined and confused, and he stopped at the threshold when he saw me. "Mrs. Your Grace," he said. He did not know what to call me. He had not, I think, addressed me by any name in 9 years, and he was now required to address me by a higher one. "Mr. Crail," I said. I did not sit. "I will not be staying. I have something to lay upon your desk." I walked across the morning room. I went to the writing desk where my own letters had been opened and read for 9 years. I unwrapped the leather. I laid the topmost letter, the 16 pages, dated Glenmore, 14th of September, 1810, flat upon the blotter where my guardian could see it without having to bend. "Read it," I said. He looked at me. He did not move. "Read it," I said again. "It will not take you 10 minutes. I will sit in the green chair by the window. I have ridden 4 days to bring it to you, sir. You will read it now." He came to the desk slowly. He did not sit. He set both hands upon the back of the chair and he stood looking down at the open page. "Whose hand is this?" "The late Duke of Thornley's, the brother of the man whose name I now bear. It is dated the 14th of September, 1810, 3 months before he killed himself on his own moor with one of his own pistols. I found it in the rafter cavity of the stable loft at Thornley Hollow on Sunday last. It was addressed to a friend at Cambridge who did not live to deliver it on. I have brought it to you, Mr. Crail, that you may read in the brother's own hand the matter of the brother's death, and the matter of your own inquiry, or absence of inquiry, before you sold me to the elder brother for £8,400. He read it. He read it standing, because he could not bring himself to sit down at his own desk in front of me. I sat in the green chair and I watched him read it. His hands grew steady where they had been shaking when he had first picked up the page, which is the opposite of what they ought to have done, and when he had finished, he laid it down upon the blotter and he stood looking at the wall above his own bookshelf for some moments before he turned to me. "Imogen," he said. He had not spoken my given name to me since I was 15 years old. "Imogen, child, I—" "You will not call me child, sir?" I said. "I am 23, and I am the Duchess of Thornley Hollow, and you traded me to a man you knew was innocent because you needed his money, and I am giving you one chance to write to every drawing room in London and tell the truth, or I will." He went a color I had not seen on his face before. "I did not know." "You knew enough," I said. "You knew the late Duke had died in unclear circumstances on his own moor. You knew the present Duke was the brother who had found him. You knew London had wanted a name for the death, and had taken his. You did not inquire because the ignorance suited you, sir. The man paid you £8,400 for my hand. You did not ask whether he had earned the name they had hung upon him. I am asking you now to undo what you did not inquire." "To whom am I to write?" he asked, after a long moment. I have not. "To Lady Sefton at Bruton Street? To Lady Cowper at Whitehall Gardens? To Mrs. Drummond Burrell at South Audley? To Lord Alvanley? To Lord Sefton? To Mr. Greville? To the editor of the Morning Chronicle? And to Lady Jersey at Berkeley Square? The list is on the second page of the packet. Mrs. Pemberton has written it out. You will write to each of them tonight. You will say that you have lately come into knowledge that the late Duke died by his own hand of a long-standing melancholia after a dueling injury at Salamanca, that the present Duke had no part in his brother's death, that you have read in the brother's own hand a letter dated 3 months before the death, which states the intention plainly, and that you are bound by conscience to make this matter known. You will sign each letter. You will frank them yourself. They will go to the post tonight." "And if I do not?" he said. "Then I will publish the letter," I said. I will go this evening from your house to the editor of the Morning Chronicle, and I will give him the 16 pages, and I will give him your name as the man who brokered my marriage in October without inquiring. The Chronicle will publish it on the following morning. Lady Jersey will read it at breakfast. The drawing rooms will hear of it by the dressing hour. You will be a man, sir, who sold a young woman to a man he had not troubled to clear, and who refused to clear him afterward. Or you will be a man who did the thing belatedly, of his own conscience, before being asked twice. Choose, Mr. Crail. I have given you a fair enough choice. I will not give you a second. He sat down upon the edge of the desk. He put his face against his hand. I will write them, he said. Look at me, Mr. Crail, when you say it. He looked at me. He had not looked at me, properly, since before my father's funeral 9 years before. He looked at me now. His pale gray eyes were red at the edges, and there was a small tremor along the line of his thin lips that he could not quite still. I will write them, Your Grace. Tonight. Tonight. By your own seal. By my own seal. And I will read every letter before it is sealed, sir, and Mrs. Pemberton will read every letter before it is sealed, and they will not leave this room until we are satisfied with their content. He nodded without lifting his face from his hand. We sat in the morning room of Half Moon Street that night with the candles burning down and the rain hammering on the sash window. He wrote the letters. He wrote them in his own hard-cramped merchant's hand. He did not flinch from the language we required. Mrs. Pemberton, in her dark mauve silk, sat in the green chair with the second copy of the late brother's letter open on her lap, and dictated the difficult phrases when his pen failed him. I stood at his shoulder and read each line as it was written. We sealed the letters with his wine-colored wax at 2:30 in the morning. The footman, who had been kept up, took the bundle to the General Post Office at 3. I stayed 2 nights more. I did not sleep in my old room. I slept in a hired chamber in Brook Street with Mrs. Pemberton across the hall. The letters reached the drawing rooms over the following 2 days. The Morning Chronicle, which had not been given the letter because the letter was no longer needed, ran a short paragraph in the column of the third evening, footed Mr. Silas Crail of Half Moon Street, retracting the rumor of 3 winters. I rode north 4 days later in the same heavy traveling carriage with Mrs. Pemberton beside me and the leather-wrapped packet upon the seat between us. The whispers had stopped within the fortnight. I knew it because Mrs. Pemberton's correspondence with her younger sister in Berkeley Square had been delivered to me by candlelight in the inn at Stafford, and the younger sister had written, Honora, the matter is laid to rest. It is laid as cleanly as a thing of 3 winters can be laid. Tell the boy. I told the boy on the steps of Thornley Hollow on the afternoon of the 7th day. He was waiting at the iron gates with one hand on the gate post, and his shoulder-length wavy dark brown hair stirring in the late November wind off the tarn, and he came down to the carriage and he handed me down himself, and he did not speak for some moments. It is done, I said. The drawing rooms have it. The Chronicle has the retraction. Your aunt's sister sends her love. And the packet? He said. Here. He took it from my arm. He carried it himself into the stone-flagged hall and along the long passage to the library. Mrs. Pemberton went up the great staircase with her cloak and her bonnet, and a small private smile she did not show me. The Duke and I were alone in the library. The fire had been lit. He set the packet upon the long oak desk. He looked at me across it. Will you burn them with me? He said. I came home thinking I would, I said. And now? And now I am not sure, Your Grace. He set his hand upon the leather. He undid the blue silk ribbon. He drew out the 16 pages of his brother's letter, and he laid it upon the hearthstone beside the fire, and he stood looking down at it. 3 years, he said. I have wanted to be rid of it for 3 years. You wanted to be rid of it because it accused you, I said. It does not accuse you any more, Your Grace. It clears you. It is not the same letter it was a fortnight ago. He looked at me. "It is his hand," I said. "It is the last long thing he wrote. It is the part of him that is left. Will you burn the part of him that is left, your grace, now that it has done what he asked of it?" If you have ever known what it is to be sold to a man the world had already condemned, subscribe to the Duke's vow. We tell these stories because some men carry the weight of a brother's death without ever asking to be forgiven. He bent to the hearth. He picked the letter up. He weighed it in his hand. He looked at the fire, and he looked at the letter, and he looked at me. "No," he said at last. "We will keep them. There is no shame in being right when the world was wrong, and I have no need to forget. Bring me the leather-bound estate journal, Imogen, the gray one with the silver clasp. They will go inside it." I brought him the journal. He folded the 16 pages of his brother's last letter, and the 5 boyhood letters, and the school letters, and the cheerful one from the regiment 4 days before Salamanca, and he laid them carefully between the pages of the estate journal, and he closed the silver clasp upon them. He set the journal upon the long oak desk. "They will live here," he said, "with the rents and the timber cuts and the tenant rolls and the tarn water levels." He was the elder brother in temperament, though I was the elder by age. "He will sit in the books with the things he kept the books for." He would have wanted that, I think. "He would," I said. He set the journal upon the long oak desk, and he stood looking at it with one hand resting flat upon the silver clasp, and he said, after a long moment, in a voice I had not heard from him before, "Imogen, may I ask you a thing now that I have not asked you in 6 weeks? May I ask you whether you would let me take your hand?" "You may," I said. He came round the desk. He stopped 2 paces from me. He held his right hand out, palm up, as one offers a hand to a small wary animal at the edge of a wood. I took my cream silk glove off, finger by finger, and I laid my hand into his. His hand was warmer than I had expected. He closed his fingers very lightly upon mine. He did not raise the hand to his lips, and he did not pull me toward him, and he did not speak. He stood for a count of perhaps 12 seconds with my hand in his, and then he opened his fingers again, and I drew my hand back, and I put the cream silk glove on once more, and I said, "Thank you, your grace." "Tobias," he said. "Tobias?" I said. We were married in plainer fashion the following Sunday, in the small Westmoreland Honeystone Village chapel covered in late October ivy and rose hips, with Mrs. Pemberton and the 2 estate stewards, and the village vicar, and no one else. I wore the deep wine-red silk gown again, with the cream Brussels lace at the neckline, and the small ivory cameo of my mother on its pearl ribbon at my throat, and over it a new pale gray wool cloak that the dowager aunt had pressed upon me as a wedding gift. The Duke wore the dark indigo tailcoat. The vicar read the vows in a slow, careful voice that did not hurry. We signed the register together. We walked back to the manor along the lane between the rose hips and the bare hawthorns, with the dowager aunt on the Duke's other arm, and the 2 stewards walking a respectful 3 paces behind, and Mrs. Pemberton said quietly to me at the iron gates, "Welcome home, child." And I did not contradict her. The winter passed. He came into the West Wing for the first time on the night of the first hard frost in mid-December, by my own invitation, and not before. He came in his shirt sleeves with a small bound book under his arm, the first volume of Cowper's letters, the one he had been waiting on a copy of, and he sat at the foot of the small fire in my parlor, and he read aloud the letter to Lady Hesketh about the hares. He read it badly, in the way that men read aloud who have not done it for years, stumbling at the proper names and laughing at himself when he stumbled, and I sat in the wing-back chair beside him, and I laughed at him too, and it was the first laughter that had been in the West Wing in 3 years, and Mrs. Pemberton in the gallery passed the door once, and went on quickly, and I heard her crying very quietly on the stairs. He did not stay that night beyond the reading of 3 letters and a fourth. He kissed my hand at the door of the parlor. He bowed. He went. I sat by the fire another hour with the book on my lap, and I did not read another word of it that evening. He came again on the second night of the new year, by my own invitation, and stayed the night, and we have not slept apart since. Spring came up the lane in the third week of March, with the hawthorn whitening and the curlews calling above the tarn. Quigley brought a pair of orphaned lambs to the kitchen door in the first week of April, and Mrs. Pemberton kept them in a lined basket by the dairy hearth, and we fed them ourselves with a leather-mouthed bottle that the underkeeper had cut for us. The drawing-rooms in London continued at their proper distance to write to us. Lady Sefton sent a kindness of a quarter of fresh-killed venison and a long letter that did not mention 3 winters at all. Lady Cowper sent a copy of a small book of essays. Lady Jersey, who was famously not a kind woman, sent a single short note in her own hand that read only, "We were wrong. S.J." The Duke laid the note inside the leather-bound estate journal beside his brother's letter, and he closed the silver clasp upon them both. It is now the second week of April, in the year of our Lord 1814. I am sitting in the Manor Library in the soft pale blue Regency afternoon gown that I have lately taken to wearing for the warm afternoons, fully covering throat to ankle as is my habit. The Duke is sitting opposite me in the matching wingback chair beside the tall arched window. The leather-bound estate journal is open on the small mahogany table between us, with the silver clasp undone, and 3 of the boyhood letters fanned across the polished wood. The letter from Eton in 1801 about the stolen pudding, the letter from the sea-bathing trip in 1804 about the indignity of striped bathing gowns, and the letter from the regiment in the spring of 1808, written 4 days before Salamanca, full of cheerful nonsense about a French farrier and a borrowed horse. I am reading them aloud to him. I am reading the one about the striped bathing gowns now. I am told they are necessary to Bias, but I tell you I have never felt more like a wasp upon the strand. And the late afternoon golden light is coming in through the tall arched window, and dust is drifting in the long slant of it, and he is laughing. A small, low, quiet laugh, the laugh of a man who has not quite remembered how to laugh and has decided, for an afternoon at least, to let himself remember, and I am laughing with him. I read him the bit about the French farrier next, and after that, the bit about Camomile, the borrowed horse who bit, and after that, the smuggled pudding from the provost's kitchen, and the leather-bound estate journal sits between us on the small mahogany table with the rest of his brother's letters folded carefully inside its cool, dry pages, and the silver clasp catches the afternoon sun, and the small ivory cameo of my mother lies at my throat on its pearl ribbon as it has lain since I was 14 years old, and the rose hips are gone from the chapel wall this April, and the new green is in the hawthorn down the lane, and somewhere over the tarn a curlew is calling, and the man I was sold to has, at last, no need to forget anything at all.